Today we want to look at the early nautical history of Port Huron, and we also want to look at a mystery that I've been working on for the last 3 or 4 days that I was finally able to solve. But we'll get to that later. Michigan's first great lumber boom took place in the Black River Valley. By the close of the Civil War, Port Huron steam mills chewed through more than 60 million feet of logs per year. This seemingly endless supply of lumber and Port Huron's location on the continent's greatest inland waterway made it a perfect place for shipbuilding and ship repair. There are 5 or 6 prominent builders in the 19th century. Some of them would form partnerships with another builder. Some would dissolve partnerships and go with a different builder. Some would change locations, and that location would become a different builder. But I'm going to give you the broad strokes here. The first builder we want to look at is Edmund Fitzgerald. His company was located at the foot of Park Street, which is now Andrew Murphy. And of course, at that time, Park Street went all the way to the river. Now, of course, it doesn't. But at the foot of Park Street, right on the river, was the Edmund Fitzgerald shipyard. Mike Connell wrote several articles on the shipbuilding in Port Huron and did a great job, and that's where I'm getting some of my information. And he said in one of his articles that Fitzgerald was born in Ireland in 1818. He was the oldest of 6 brothers who came to the United States with their family in 1836. Fitzgerald sailed on the lakes for nearly 30 years before opening a shipyard on the St. Clair River. Fitzgerald, who served as Port Huron's mayor in 1879, was a great-uncle of the Edmund Fitzgerald, who loaned his name to the legendary 729-foot freighter that sank in Lake Superior storm in 1975. Later on, he would partner up with another shipbuilder by the name of Leighton, and it became the Fitzgerald-Leighton Company. The next shipbuilder we want to look at is the Muir shipyard. This was owned by Archibald Muir. This was located at the foot of Huron Street, not Huron Avenue, but Huron Street. It's not there anymore, but it used to be between Merchant Street and Fort Street, about where that yellow line is. Muir was born in Scotland in 1833 and arrived in Port Huron at the age of 33. In this illustrative map from 1867, as we zoom in here, you can see where the Muir shipyard was. You see one ship that looks like it's already built on the right and one on the wooden stocks to the left of that. And if we go up here, you can actually see where the Fitzgerald shipyard was. And you've got one being built, you can see there on the wood stocks as well. And another ship floating alongside. Muir started out with a partner by the name of Alexander Stewart. Later on, he'd be joined with another partner by the name of William Livingstone, and the business would be known as Muir Livingstone and Company. In the winter of 1868-69, they excavated a canal for a dry dock. It paralleled the foot of Quay Street and opened into the St. Clair River just north of Hibbers Sawmill, which would later be Howard Sawmill. And you can see it here in this illustrative map from 1894 that has the number 15 on it. On today's Google map, it would be about where the red lines are. You can also see it in this photograph here as we zoom in. In 1870, Muir reorganized their business as the Port Huron Dry Dock Company. In this advertisement, it says Port Huron Dry Dock Company, shipbuilding, repairing, derrick for shipping spars, etc. Dealers in ship timber, deck, planks, spars, all kinds of material for building and repairing. The mouth of Black River. The venture would be short-lived. The company dissolved in 1871, and Muir sold the dry dock to Thomas Dunford and Dunford-Alverson. Muir quit his business in 1874 and returned to the lakes as a sailor. In October of 1892, Muir was piloting the steam barge Nashua when it capsized in a storm west of Bayfield, Ontario. All hands were lost. Dunford-Alverson's first shipyard was at the foot of McMorran. After they purchased the property where the dry dock was, they moved their shipyard over there. We looked at Dunford-Alverson dry dock in video number 30, so if you want to see more photos and know more about it, you can go back and look at that video. Something that I wasn't aware of until I was working on this video is that the Omar Conger, the ferry, was built by Dunford and Alverson. So its beginning was at this dry dock, and its end wasn't too far from there in Black River when the explosion occurred. Well, that's all the shipyards there was on the east side of Huron Avenue, but there was one more on the west side, and that was Jinx Shipyard. Its first location was on Black River between Huron Avenue and Erie. In this photograph, you can see the First Baptist Church in the background, and if you look real careful in the background, you can see the top of the courthouse as well. The second location was further up by the train bridge. And here you can see a photograph of that location as they're launching a ship. But we covered Jinx Shipyard in video number 30, so we don't want to rehash that. On a side note, I should mention that there was a tremendous fire at the Jinx Shipyard. That was in March of 1901 that pretty much destroyed the shipyard. They were able to save a couple of the ships that were there, but not the yard. So they had to rebuild from that, and they did. The Daily Herald says, fire wrought ruin to Jinx Shipbuilding Company. Destructive fire razed it to the ground early this morning, boats not burned. In 1 hour's time, ashes and charred ruins took the place of a busy mart of industry. All right, that's all the shipbuilders in the city. And we looked at one of the dry docks. There was actually a couple more dry docks. And we looked at the Wolverine dry dock that was up by the Bean Dock. We looked at that in video number 100. And I don't know if I ever told you where the first Wolverine dry dock was. I think I did, but I couldn't find it. And so just to make sure it gets in the guidebook, I want to make sure that we have it on record. And this is where the first one was located. The dry dock was located between Fort Street and Michigan Street. And you can see it in the Sanborn map here. It almost looks like a ship that's docked. But of course, it actually is a ship. The dry dock was made out of the hull of the railroad car ferry, the Wolverine, which is where Wolverine Dry Dock got its name. And this is where it would be on Google Maps today, inside that red box there. In this photograph, which was taken long after its heyday, I assume, you can see that car ferry hull was a wood hull, and you can see what's left of it here. These types of docks were called floating docks. The ship would actually float into the hull of the Wolverine, and then the gate would be closed behind it, and the water would be pumped out. The Dunford-Alverson dry dock basically worked on the same principle, except it was cut into the land. The second Wolverine dock at the south end of town was also made from a ship's hull. This was made from the Fred Pabst, which was a bulk carrier, a wooden bulk carrier, and it had sunk, and the Reed wrecking crew had brought it up and taken the engine out of it and delivered it to the Wolverine dry dock to use on the south end of town. The fellow that the Fred Pabst was named after, I thought was quite a unique story. His real name was Frederick Pabst. His family immigrated to the United States from Germany back in 1848. And at the age of 14, the young Pabst took a job in the Great Lakes as a cabin steward, and by 21, he was a captain. One day, a Milwaukee brewer named Philip Best boarded Captain Pabst's ship with his eldest daughter, Maria Best. The two courted for 2 years before being married in Milwaukee on March 25, 1862. But one day, a particularly harrowing storm forced the young Captain Pabst to ground his ship. Although he dramatically saved everyone on board, he abandoned the sea life. Instead, he accepted his father's in-law proposition and bought a half interest in the Philip Best Brewing Company. After Captain Pabst's brother-in-law and business partner, Emil Shandon, passed away in 1888, Pabst took full control of the company, changing the name to, wait for it, Pabst Brewing Company. This commercial for Pabst has been brought to you absolutely without charge. All right, let's get back to the dry docks. If you recall, in video number 217, we discovered that Dunford-Alverson had a second dry dock called the Lower Dry Dock, and it was on Military Street. And we were able to actually pinpoint the exact location. We looked at the Stanford map. It didn't have the address on this particular photograph here, but it did have it in the city directory. And then when I discovered that Reed had bought the dry dock from Dunford-Alverson, I looked at his Sanford map, and it did have the exact address. So I was pretty certain. I was very certain. I was absolutely sure that this is where the Reed dry dock was, and also the Dunford-Alverson dry dock, one and the same. So I was absolutely certain of the location, at least until I got a message from Ed Walla. Ed said in this message that he loved my videos, but he never saw anything in my videos about the Reed dry dock that was basically on his property at the foot of Reed Street, which makes sense. And if you look down from the satellite map, it almost looks like there is a portion of a dry dock there already. And that arrow there, that's Ed's home. Ed and I sent several messages back and forth with different ideas and theories, including the one that the dry dock on his property would perhaps been the lower Reed dock, and the dry dock that he bought from Dunford-Alverson would have been the upper dry docks. But I couldn't prove that either. Ed's property is in the 2900 block of Military, and where we thought the Reed dock was in the 2500. So it wasn't even close. I mean, I could see where the numbers could be off a little bit, but that's like 400 numbers off, so I just couldn't figure it out. But I told Ed I would keep researching until I proved it one way or the other. And I did that. I was going through the city directories one night, and I was looking at it in the 2900 block, and I came upon a hotel, the Riverview Hotel. Now, I had covered this in a previous video, and I knew it was in the 2900 block. It was in South Park around Connor Street. And as you can see here, 2901, they're saying it was that in this directory. And this was like a 1907 directory. And so I went to the Google Maps, and lo and behold, it says Connor begins at 3600. Eureka! I think we found the problem. Military Street changed its numbers. I found that as you go further north, the difference decreases, so that eventually some of the numbers probably are the same. But when you come to its number, that would have been the 2500 block, back then when the dry dock was there. So the map was right, the city directory was right, but the numbers were wrong. And in this article, as I was finishing up going through the archives of the Times Herald, I came across this article from 1904. To vacate Military Street, steps may be taken by Common Council, providing shipbuilding plant is erected. First, however, sanction of toll road company must be secured. In this article, it says that the Jinx Shipbuilding Company wanted to partner with the Dunford Dry Dock so that they could build a large shipyard on the old Dunford-Alverson property. But the kicker is this: they wanted to include Military Street as well. They wanted the city to close off Military Street and divert it around their shipyard, which we now know is in the 2900 block of Military Street, which used to be the 2500 block. But not only that, it was a much bigger piece of property than that. The article goes on to state the Dunford property included all the way from 16th Street to Dove, which was a good chunk of real estate. And if you add Military Street in there, it's even a bigger chunk. So the city had a hard decision to make. Jinx wanted the city to pay for everything concerning the shutdown of Military Street and building a new street around it, with no cost to them, but just to the taxpayers. The city also realized that Jinx had had prior offers to go to a different city to put their business, such as this one in Duluth. In this article here, it says city fathers took a straw vote that discouraged the committees from pursuing it. But at the same time, Jinx's aspirations withered after engineers discovered the riverbank was unstable and unsuitable for a shipyard. So the partnership never took place. In late 1905, the partner in the Jinx shipyard put up a for sale sign, and the Jinx Shipbuilding Company was no more. And the Dunford-Alverson property was sold to Captain Reed. This would be the second dry dock that Reed owned. The other dry dock was a floating dry dock that was in Sarnia. He purchased a dry dock in July of 1908. And in 1915, he bought additional property north of his property so he could expand his dry dock. And you can see in the newspaper on the front page, it says, Reed's dry dock to be enlarged for big boats. Purchase river frontage north of their plant. About $150,000 to be spent in making extensive improvements. The deal is closed today. In this interesting geographical map that Ed found, it shows his property in that yellow rectangle. But if you look at the dark lines that go the opposite direction, you can see how large that dry dock was. It starts south of his property, goes across his property, and extends north onto the property next to him. So it was a large dry dock, at least for that time. In this advertisement, it gives you a good idea what Reed's dry dock looked like. Here it looks like there's one of the whaleback ships inside the dock. Part of the improvements that Reed made on the dry dock was that he put cement bottom in it. It actually extends up the sides as well, but the original docks, all the older dry docks, had clay bottoms. And it was just a bunch of muck down there most of the time because not all the water would go out. And the best part of this story is that Ed has some photos of the original dry dock when Dunford and Alverson had it and what it looked like then. And these are photographs that, as far as I'm concerned, have never been seen. Of course, I use that term loosely. Obviously, some people have seen them, but for the most part, no one has seen these photographs before, and they're quite impressive. Here's the first one, and you can see what I mean by being a mess at the bottom of these old dry docks. This photo impressed me by how large these ships were for that time period. And it also shows the ships that are waiting to get in the dry dock. I mean, he had a backlog. Here's a little better view of the ships that are waiting. In this view, looking down and looking north or northeast on the dry dock, you get to see some of the buildings in the dry dock as well. In this photograph of this freighter, you can see it sitting in the dry dock in water. But alongside, you can see where that fellow's standing in the middle of the railroad tracks. I don't think this was a spur off the main line. I think this was a track that they used for the materials for the ships themselves, moving them back and forth. I didn't see anything in the Sanborn maps that would indicate that this was a spur, but it's just my opinion. This is a great picture of a freighter in dry dock, but it gives you an idea of the era that these pictures were taken, because during this time you had ships like this, steel-hulled steamers, but you still had the wooden schooners, as you can see in this photograph here. There's another schooner as well, and as we zoom in here, we can see the name is J.B. Lawson. And here's a photograph of the whole ship looking from the side. Well, this video took a little longer than I anticipated. Probably only of interest to historians, but perhaps some of you other folks enjoyed it as well. And we got to see some amazing photographs of history. So join me in my next video and we'll see what there is to see.